She was just picking up shells, her focus entirely on the sandy beach, when a voice cut through the peaceful morning. "Why is she even here?" The crowd turned to stare at the slender woman nobody recognized. No competitive record existed, but somehow she was allowed on the prestigious shooting range. Nobody defended her presence as the range officer demanded her credentials. The woman simply handed over a worn leather case. Inside was something that made the official's face turn pale. A marksmanship medal from a competition that had been discontinued 15 years ago, awarded only to the top 5 shooters in the world. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Every weekend at Clearwater Shooting Range, when the gates opened at 6 a.m. for elite practice sessions, there was a woman who always arrived first. Her profile only stated M. Chen, 34 years old, recreational participant. Nobody knew her background. M. Chen had a lean athletic build, about 5 feet 6 inches tall, with suntan skin and chestnut hair always tied back in a practical ponytail. On her right hand was a distinctive burn mark that covered part of her palm. Her eyes were hazel, steady and calm, showing neither arrogance nor uncertainty. She wore simple clothing, faded jeans, plain t-shirts, sometimes a light windbreaker, no sponsorship logos or team affiliations. She always carried an old leather rifle case, its edges worn smooth from years of handling. She never engaged in the usual competitive banter. Professional shooters would whisper among themselves, probably just a hobbyist with money to burn. Maybe she's filming videos for social media. Heard she inherited a fancy rifle and is just playing around. Chen didn't react to any of this talk. She practiced alone, setting up her own targets, adjusting her scope, cleaning her equipment with methodical precision using the special cloth she carried. Once during a particularly windy day, a young competitor was struggling with his calculations for long-distance shooting. Before anyone noticed, Chen had quietly placed a handwritten note with wind adjustment formulas beside him, then returned to her station without seeking acknowledgment. The next weekend it was raining heavily. She arrived before anyone else, tested the wet conditions, made small chalk marks on the shooting stations to indicate optimal positioning for the conditions, then disappeared before the competitive shooters arrived. But kindness couldn't shield her from growing suspicion. The professional shooting community operated on reputation and recognized achievements. Someone without competitive credentials raised questions about their presence at an elite facility. Chen's access to the range challenged the established hierarchy. Her knowledge of ballistics, her steady hand, her equipment adjustments all suggested professional training that wasn't reflected in any tournament records. During practice sessions, she would observe everything with professional attention, not as a fan, but as someone assessing techniques with expert understanding. Her movements were economical, deliberate, nothing flashy or unnecessary. When equipment malfunctioned, she would silently fix it without drawing attention. When competitors struggled with difficult shots, she would demonstrate perfect form through her own practice, never offering unsolicited advice. But her anonymity made the competitive shooters uncomfortable. In professional shooting circles, unknown quantities represented potential threats to rankings and sponsorships. Her silence was interpreted as secretive rather than modest. Her competence was viewed with suspicion rather than respect. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Standard credential verification was underway for a special invitational event. But when attention focused on Chen, the atmosphere shifted. Suspicion that had been building for months finally found expression. During the credential check, a national champion shouted, "Why is she even here? Probably can't even make it difficult." Shot. Nobody objected as the head range officer requested Chen's credentials. She stepped forward, placed her leather case on the table, and opened it herself. A former Olympic coach recalled, She never raised her voice, but made everyone pay attention through her quiet confidence. Inside the case was a perfectly maintained custom rifle, a handwritten notebook with ballistic calculations, and a special gold medallion with engraved numbers on the back. The air grew tense as the range officer examined it, his voice suddenly respectful. "This is from the International Precision Series from 15 years ago. They only awarded 5 of these. The competition was discontinued after—" Everyone looked at Chen. She said nothing, just stood there, posture relaxed but alert, eyes showing neither defensiveness nor pride. Chen was asked to verify her identity for the special event. No name appeared in any recent competition databases, no tournament records in any national or international systems. The security director declared, "Either this is a world-class shooter who disappeared from the circuit or someone with an excellent forgery." The medallion was sent for authentication. Confirmed as genuine, issued at the International Precision Marksmanship Competition, an event so demanding it was eventually deemed too difficult to continue after only 5 years. Meanwhile, an equipment manager remembered. Last month she noticed a scope misalignment on the junior team's rifles. If she hadn't adjusted them, those kids would have developed terrible habits that would have taken years to correct. She didn't seek recognition, just left alignment specifications for each rifle. A review of security footage from the previous month showed Chen demonstrating perfect shooting stance to a discouraged teenager who was about to quit the sport. In the footage, she executed every fundamental flawlessly, then quietly walked away after the young shooter successfully hit the target. People began to exchange glances, but the whispers had changed tone. A visiting shooting instructor saw Chen's medallion on the verification table and suddenly went silent. "I once watched a phenomenal shooter in a competition in 2010. Female. Same build, same methodical approach. They called her the Ghost because she would appear, dominate the field, then vanish. I heard she had retired after an accident." The investigation deepened as more unusual details surfaced. Equipment that other shooters struggled with performed remarkably well after Chen's subtle adjustments. Shooting stances that had been causing strain injuries were modified based on her example, resulting in improved scores and reduced fatigue. Weather calculations that confused even experienced shooters were solved through her quiet demonstrations. Security footage revealed patterns that suggested exceptional awareness. She positioned herself to minimize distraction for others, adjusted her practice schedule to accommodate competitors preparing for tournaments, and moved through the facility with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with professional shooting environments. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. But most significantly, her psychological profile didn't match typical competitive shooters. She showed none of the pre-competition anxiety, status consciousness, or rivalrous behavior common among professionals. Instead, she displayed the calm focus of someone who had already proven everything they needed to prove, who shot not for recognition but for the pure perfection of the discipline itself. The contradiction was puzzling. If she was a current champion, why no public record? If she was retired, why the continued perfect form? The medical staff noted additional mysteries. Her breathing control indicated specialized training. Her trigger discipline suggested thousands of hours of practice. Her stance showed evidence of professional coaching at the highest level. Yet she participated in no tournaments, sought no sponsorships, gave no interviews, and appeared in no rankings. The pieces didn't align with any conventional competitive shooting career. Either she was an active champion operating completely outside the public eye, or something else entirely. The breakthrough came when a search through archived competition records revealed a partial match, not for her current identity, but for her shooting style. A classified file was reopened after being sealed for 15 years. Competition name: International Precision Series. 7 medalists over 5 years, all publicly recognized except one. The final champion, identity withheld at competitor's request, codenamed Phantom. Only a blurry photograph existed. Slender female figure, rifle held perfectly, making an impossible 2,800-meter shot in variable wind conditions. Image comparison with current footage. 94% match with Chen, Master Sergeant Williams, former coordinator of the competition, personally visited the range. He entered without announcement, looked directly at Chen. I once watched someone make a shot that our ballistics computer said was impossible. When everyone else failed, the shooter calculated adjustments nobody had considered. Today I recognize that person is still shooting, still teaching others through silent example. He extended his hand in respect. The entire range fell silent, not by command but by the weight of the moment. The revelation transformed everything everyone thought they knew. The International Precision Series hadn't been a conventional shooting competition. It had been developed as a specialized program to identify extraordinary marksmanship talent. The competition had been discontinued not because it was too difficult, but because after the 5th year, it had fulfilled its purpose, identifying individuals with unprecedented natural ability who could advance the science of precision shooting. 5 champions had been publicly celebrated, but the 6th, the most exceptional, had requested anonymity. During the final competition, when all other competitors failed to hit a target at an extreme distance in challenging wind conditions, Phantom had made calculations that defied conventional ballistics. She had completed a shot that experts deemed theoretically impossible, minus 2,850 meters, with crosswinds and humidity factors that should have made accuracy unattainable. For 15 years, she had been officially retired from competition. But she had continued practicing, continued perfecting her craft, continued passing knowledge to others through subtle demonstration rather than formal instruction. Her presence at the range wasn't coincidence. She was there to ensure that new generations of shooters developed proper fundamentals, that they understood marksmanship was about precision and discipline, not fame or sponsorships. Master Sergeant Williams presented her with a new medallion, saying only, "We once recorded your achievements in classified files, but from now on your methods will live in the techniques of everyone you've quietly taught." Chen said nothing, accepted the medallion. Without display, placing it back in her case. Before leaving the verification table, she looked around at the faces watching her, then nodded slightly, acknowledging them for the first time. The impact on everyone present was profound. They had been judging someone who had advanced their sport beyond established boundaries, who had chosen anonymity over fame, private excellence over public recognition. Her silence hadn't been aloofness, it had been focus. Speaking about techniques would have distracted from demonstrating them perfectly. Her anonymity hadn't been secretive, it had been purposeful. True mastery required no audience, no validation beyond the perfection of the discipline itself. A young competitor confessed, "She once corrected my breathing pattern with just a simple hand gesture. My scores improved 30% immediately. I never thanked her because I didn't understand what she'd done until now." The entire facility's understanding of excellence and achievement was redefined in that moment. True mastery wasn't about trophies or recognition. It was about perfecting one's craft, regardless of who was watching. Chen had demonstrated the highest level of dedication, excellence without audience, teaching without recognition, advancing a discipline without seeking credit. Her leather case containing the medallion wasn't about status. It was a personal reminder of standards. She carried the knowledge of what was possible in marksmanship. She honored the discipline by continuing to perfect it. Every person she helped, every shooter she quietly guided, was an extension of her commitment to excellence. Her presence at the range was her way of ensuring that true marksmanship fundamentals wouldn't be lost in an era increasingly focused on equipment, sponsorships, and public recognition. The medallion wasn't just acknowledgment of her skill. It was recognition that some people advance their field beyond conventional boundaries, and that the most significant contributions often come from those who seek no acknowledgment. The next day, the far corner of the range where she usually practiced contained only her worn leather case. Beside it was the original medallion and a handwritten note. "I don't need recognition. I just need you to never compromise your fundamentals. Like I never compromised mine." Nobody knew where she went, but from that day forward, the range was prepared each morning without instructions. Shooters formed study groups to relearn proper breathing techniques and stance fundamentals. A simple drawing appeared on the range wall, a slender figure in perfect shooting position. Below it read, "Excellence is measured by the shot, not by who's watching." A competitor wrote in the range logbook, "If there's a medal for people who advance a discipline without seeking fame, I would place it in that leather case forever." The cultural transformation was immediate and lasting. Competitors began treating range staff with genuine respect. Equipment maintenance became everyone's responsibility. Fundamentals became more important than flashy techniques. Most importantly, the definition of mastery changed. Masters weren't just people who won tournaments. They were people who perfected their craft regardless of recognition. The facility developed an unofficial tradition. New shooters would be told about the woman who practiced in the far corner, how she had achieved the impossible without seeking credit, how she had taught through demonstration rather than instruction, how she had advanced marksmanship beyond competitive boundaries. Her story became a standard of excellence that inspired rather than intimidated. People began looking for opportunities to help others quietly, to solve problems without taking credit, to advance their disciplines beyond conventional limits. The leather case remained in the far corner, never moved or disturbed. It became an unofficial monument to anonymous excellence. Shooters would sometimes leave small notes beside it, commitments to fundamentals, promises to maintain the purity of the discipline, acknowledgments of how her example had changed their approach. The facility's performance metrics improved dramatically. Accuracy rates increased, injury rates decreased, member retention reached unprecedented levels. But more importantly, graduates carried her philosophy to other ranges. The concept of excellence beyond recognition spread throughout the shooting community. Her influence multiplied as the people she had touched inspired others to pursue mastery with the same quiet dedication. 6 months later, similar stories began emerging from other facilities. Anonymous mentors who appeared when needed, solved problems without credit, then disappeared. Nobody knew if these were the same person or different individuals inspired by her example, but the pattern was unmistakable. Excellence without recognition was becoming a movement. Her legacy wasn't measured in trophies or records. It was measured in the transformed techniques of those who learned from her example, in the renewed emphasis on fundamentals over fame. Chen didn't need titles, didn't need recognition. She needed only one thing: for people to understand that true mastery exists beyond applause. Maybe today you'll see someone practicing alone, perfecting their craft when nobody's watching. Don't dismiss them. Don't underestimate them. Maybe they once achieved the impossible and are still showing others what's possible. The greatest mastery happens in silence. The most important advances are often made by those who seek no recognition. Chen taught us that excellence isn't about being celebrated. It's about achieving perfection whether anyone notices or not. It's about advancing your discipline beyond conventional boundaries, beyond recognition, beyond established limitations. Sometimes the person who seems invisible is the one pushing the boundaries of what's possible. In a world that celebrates fame, she chose to celebrate perfection. That's the difference between wanting to be recognized as a master and actually being one. The revelation about Chen triggered a wave of questions across the shooting community. Whispers became discussions. Discussions became investigations. Every competitor who had dismissed her now searched their memories for interactions, moments, when she might have demonstrated her extraordinary skill. The range became a hub of speculation, with members combing through security footage, old competition records, and personal archives for any glimpse of the mysterious shooter. 2 weeks after Chen's disappearance, the International Shooting Federation announced a special exhibition event. The centerpiece would be an extreme distance challenge minus 3,000 meters in variable conditions. The announcement sent shockwaves through the community. No sanctioned competition had ever featured such an impossible distance. The current world record stood at 2,500 meters, achieved under perfect conditions after months of preparation. This would be attempted with only 1 week's notice, in spring weather known for unpredictable winds and humidity changes. Major shooting teams declined the invitation, declaring it a publicity stunt designed to embarrass even elite marksmen. Sports scientists published articles explaining the mathematical impossibility of consistent accuracy at such distances with current technology. Ballistics experts calculated that even a half-millimeter tremor at the rifle would translate to meters of deviation at the target. Equipment manufacturers distanced themselves, unwilling to have their products associated with inevitable failure. Despite the backlash, the exhibition proceeded. Media coverage was minimal, with most outlets sending junior reporters to cover what was expected to be an embarrassing footnote in competitive shooting history. The morning of the event brought challenging conditions: gusting crosswinds at 15 to 20 miles per hour, humidity fluctuations as clouds passed overhead, and temperature gradients, creating mirage effects visible through scopes. As the small crowd gathered at Clearwater Range, the competitors' area remained conspicuously empty. Only 3 shooters had registered, all local enthusiasts with modest skills. The event organizer, visibly nervous, repeatedly checked his watch as the scheduled start time approached. 5 minutes before the competition, a silver pickup truck with dusty license plates pulled into the far parking area. From it emerged a familiar slender figure carrying a worn leather case. Chen walked quietly to the registration table, signed a single form, and proceeded to the farthest shooting station without speaking to anyone. She unpacked her equipment methodically, a custom rifle that showed signs of heavy use but immaculate maintenance, a weather meter smaller than a cell phone, and her distinctive cleaning cloth. She spent 10 minutes simply observing the conditions, occasionally making notes in a small weatherproof notebook. As she prepared, the scattered audience began to grow. Competitors who had publicly declined the invitation arrived quietly, standing at the back of the viewing area. Range staff who normally maintained professional distance drifted toward the firing line. Local shooters who had practiced alongside Chen for months positioned themselves for the best view. Without announcement or fanfare, a critical mass of the shooting community had assembled to witness what most believed would be impossible. The range officer approached nervously. "Ms. Chen, the target is positioned at exactly 3,000 meters. We've verified the distance with laser measurement. Each competitor has 15 minutes for calibration and 5 attempts at the target. Scoring will be..." Chen nodded once, indicating she understood the parameters. The range officer, momentarily flustered by her calm demeanor in the face of such a challenge, cleared his throat and continued. "As the only professional-level competitor, would you prefer to shoot last?" Chen shook her head and gestured toward the other participants. She would shoot in the assigned order, 3rd position. The first 2 competitors approached the challenge with admirable courage. Both were recreational shooters with solid fundamentals but limited experience. Each made methodical adjustments, calculated their best estimates for windage and elevation, and took their allotted shots. Neither came closer than 5 meters from the target center, respectable attempts at an impossible distance. When Chen's turn came, the atmosphere shifted palpably. Conversations quieted, phones were lowered, attention focused entirely on the slender woman who moved to the firing position with unhurried precision. For the first 5 minutes of her allotted time, Chen did something unexpected. Nothing. She didn't adjust her scope. She didn't check her ammunition. She simply sat completely still, observing the full distance to the target, appearing to catalog every variable in the complex equation of the shot. At the 6-minute mark, she made a single notation in her book, then began her preparation. Her movements were so efficient, they appeared almost choreographed. Each adjustment to her equipment was decisive, made once and not reconsidered. She tested the wind not with a meter, but with a pinch of fine sand released from her fingers. She checked humidity by touching her fingertip to her lip. Temperature gradients were measured not with equipment, but by studying the mirage patterns visible through her scope. At exactly 13 minutes into her allotted time, without announcing she was ready, Chen settled into position. Her breathing pattern changed visibly, deeper, more rhythmic, creating a perfectly still platform during the natural respiratory pause. Her finger approached the trigger with millimeter precision, touching it with just enough pressure to take up the slack without initiating the firing sequence. For 78 seconds, she remained completely motionless. Experienced shooters in the audience recognized what was happening. She was waiting. Not for courage or concentration, but for the perfect alignment of environmental conditions. She was reading the wind not just at her position, but across the entire 3,000-meter journey the bullet would travel. When she finally took the shot, the sound seemed almost anticlimactic after such intense preparation. There was a 3-second delay, the time required for the bullet to travel the extreme distance before the spotting scope operators. Voice broke the silence. Center target, perfect hit. The crowd remained silent, most assuming they had misheard. The spotter, voice now carrying a tremor of disbelief, repeated, confirmed hit. Center ring. Chen made a single notation in her book. Without celebration or acknowledgment of the stunned silence behind her, she began preparations for her second shot. Her methodology remained identical, the same patient observation, the same efficient adjustments, the same preternatural stillness before taking the shot. Only now the crowd held a collective breath as she worked. Her second shot, center target. Her third, center target. Her fourth, center target. Before her fifth attempt, something changed in the atmosphere. The wind, which had been consistent, in its inconsistency, suddenly shifted. A new weather pattern moved in, creating variable gusts that changed direction every few seconds. Even the most experienced shooters exchanged knowing glances. Under these conditions, maintaining accuracy at even half this distance would be virtually impossible. Chen paused, studying the new conditions. For the first time she appeared to hesitate, making calculations that seemed to challenge even her extraordinary methodology. As her final minutes ticked away, whispers began among the crowd. Perhaps 4 perfect shots would be the legacy of this day. Perhaps even the mysterious champion had found the edge of possibility. With 30 seconds remaining in her allotted time, Chen made several rapid adjustments to her scope. Then, rather than assuming her standard position, she shifted her stance slightly, creating a modified platform that no recognized shooting discipline taught. The change was subtle but significant. She was adapting not just her calculations but her entire approach to address the chaotic new wind pattern. Her final shot broke the silence with 3 seconds remaining on the clock. The longest 3 seconds in competitive shooting history followed as the bullet traveled its improbable journey. The spotter's voice, when it finally came, was barely audible. Center target, perfect score, 5 shots. 5 perfect hits. At a distance declared impossible by every ballistics expert, every equipment manufacturer, every shooting authority. The small crowd remained frozen in disbelief. Then, from the back, a slow handclap began. It spread gradually until the entire assembly was applauding. not the polite acknowledgment of a sporting achievement, but the profound recognition of having witnessed something that expanded the boundaries of what humanity thought possible. Chen acknowledged the response with a slight nod, but her focus remained on her equipment as she methodically packed each piece into her worn case. As she prepared to leave the firing line, a voice cut through the continuing applause. How? How? Is this possible? The question came from Samuel Reed, current Olympic gold medalist and holder of 3 world records. His voice carried no challenge, only genuine desire to understand. For the first time, Chen paused. She looked directly at Reed, then at the assembled crowd of shooters. After a moment's consideration, she returned to her station and opened her notebook. With a gesture that invited approach, she displayed her calculations. They weren't the standard ballistics formulas taught in advanced marksmanship. The notations included variables that conventional shooting science didn't consider: microfluctuations in barometric pressure, the Earth's rotation at their specific latitude, the precise density altitude calculated to 4 decimal places. But most surprisingly, alongside the mathematical precision were intuitive factors: the feel of the wind on exposed skin, the subtle changes in light quality as clouds moved, the almost imperceptible shift in humidity as the day progressed. Reed studied the notebook, his expression transforming from confusion to revelation. "You're not just calculating the physics," he said quietly. "You're integrating intuition with mathematics. You're shooting not just with science, but with harmony," Chen said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was clear and precise, like her movements. "The bullet and the environment must harmonize. Our job is to understand both deeply enough to create that harmony." The simplicity of her explanation belied the years of dedication required to achieve such integration. As the crowd pressed closer, hungering for more insight, Chen closed her notebook and returned it to her case. She had demonstrated her method through action. Those with the wisdom to understand would find their own path to such harmony. As she left the firing line, a tournament official approached with a trophy and ceremonial check. The exhibition had promised substantial prize money, enough to fund a competitive career for years. Chen shook her head, politely declining both. At the official's confused insistence, she took a pen and wrote on the back of the check, "Equipment Fund for Junior Shooters." The gesture silenced the crowd once more. In rejecting recognition and compensation, she had demonstrated that her achievement wasn't about external validation. It was about expanding possibilities, about showing what could be accomplished when artificial limitations were removed. As she walked toward the parking area, competitors parted to create a path, many nodding in silent respect. Before reaching her truck, Chen paused beside a group of junior shooters who had watched the exhibition from a designated training area. Without speaking, she opened her case and removed 5 unfired rounds identical to those she had used. She placed them on the bench beside the wide-eyed teenagers, then added her weatherproof notebook containing the calculations for the impossible shots. The message was clear: here are the tools. Here is the knowledge. The impossible is waiting for the next generation willing to transcend conventional limitations. As her truck pulled away from Clearwater Range, the impact of the morning's demonstration was already rippling through the shooting community. Cell phones captured the moment the results were posted on the electronic scoreboard. Social media channels normally dedicated to equipment reviews and tournament results exploded with first-hand accounts. By evening, ballistics experts were publishing revised theories about the maximum effective range of precision rifles. Equipment manufacturers were announcing research initiatives into specialized ammunition for extreme distances. But the most profound transformation happened not in the technology, but in the mindset of shooters themselves. The human element that Chen had demonstrated, the integration of science and intuition, the harmony between shooter, equipment, and environment, sparked a renaissance in training methodologies. Shooters who had relied entirely on technology and formulas began developing their environmental awareness. Teams that had focused on equipment advantages started emphasizing the mental and intuitive aspects of their discipline. 3 days after the exhibition, Clearwater Range made an unprecedented announcement. The far corner station where Chen had practiced would be permanently designated as the Harmony Station. It would remain open to all shooters, but without technological aids, no electronic wind meters, no automated ballistic computers, no rangefinders. Only the fundamentals: a shooter, a rifle, and the environment. The station would serve as a reminder that while technology advanced the sport, the heart of marksmanship remained the human capacity to achieve harmony with natural conditions. The leather case never reappeared at Clearwater Range, but its impact remained. Competitors who had dismissed Chen now studied security footage of her practice sessions, noticing the subtle details that had escaped their attention. How she would pause before shooting if a cloud passed overhead, how she would adjust her position based on the feel of air currents too gentle for instruments to detect, how she would center herself with 3 deliberate breaths before each shot. As weeks passed, the question on everyone's mind was, where had Chen gone? Theories abounded. Some believed she had been recruited by specialized military units, seeking to apply her methodology to their training. Others suggested she had returned to the anonymous practice of her art, perhaps at another facility where her reputation hadn't preceded her. The most persistent rumor claimed she traveled to remote locations around the world, seeking new environmental challenges that would push even her extraordinary capabilities. The truth emerged a month later when a small coastal community reported an unusual sight. A slender woman with a weathered face spent each morning collecting shells along the shoreline, meticulously selecting those with perfect symmetry. In the afternoons, she would position herself on a distant bluff, using a spotting scope to observe wildlife across the bay. Local children reported that she taught them to identify birds by their flight patterns, to predict weather changes by cloud formations, to understand tidal patterns by observing subtle shifts in watercolor. She never mentioned shooting, never referred to competitions or records. But the awareness she taught, the deep observation of natural conditions, the integration of multiple environmental factors, the harmony between observer and environment, laid the foundation for understanding that transcended any single discipline. She was teaching not just observation but integration, not just calculation but intuition. When asked why she collected only perfectly symmetrical shells, she offered one of her rare explanations. Nature achieves perfection through balance. We learn by recognizing that balance. The shells weren't souvenirs. They were teaching tools, physical reminders of the harmony she had demonstrated at 3,000 meters. As news of her location spread through the shooting community, a debate emerged. Should they approach her? Seek more direct instruction? Ask the thousands of questions her demonstration had generated? The consensus, arrived at with unusual unity, was to respect her chosen anonymity. She had shown the way through demonstration. The journey towards such mastery was individual, not something that could be transmitted through words alone. Instead, the community honored her example by transforming their approach to the discipline. Training programs that had emphasized equipment and technique now included equal focus on environmental awareness. Competitions began featuring harmony divisions where technological aids were minimized. Most significantly, the definition of mastery expanded beyond accuracy statistics to include the integration of science and intuition that Chen had demonstrated. 6 months after the exhibition, the International Shooting Federation officially recognized a new world record: 3,000 meters, 5 consecutive bullseyes, variable conditions. The record holder was listed not as Chen, but as Harmony Shooter, an acknowledgment that her achievement belonged not to an individual identity, but to the expanded possibilities she had revealed. The shell collector never acknowledged the recognition, never returned to competitive shooting. But her legacy continued to reshape the discipline she had transformed. Young shooters no longer trained solely on ranges with controlled conditions. They sought varied environments, diverse challenges, the opportunity to develop the environmental integration Chen had demonstrated. They learned to feel the wind rather than simply measure it, to sense barometric changes rather than read instruments, to achieve harmony with conditions rather than merely calculate adjustments for them. A year after the exhibition, a handwritten letter arrived at Clearwater Range, addressed simply to the community. Inside was a single sheet of paper containing a previously undisclosed calculation method for extreme distance shooting. The approach integrated conventional ballistics with environmental factors no previous methodology had considered. The letter was unsigned, but the handwriting matched the notations in the weatherproof notebook Chen had left for the junior shooters. The final paragraph read, "Limitations exist primarily in our willingness to transcend them. The harmony between shooter, bullet, and environment has no maximum distance. There's only the journey toward perfect integration, which continues with each breath, each observation, each moment of alignment with the world around us." The message transformed Chen's legacy from a single extraordinary achievement to an ongoing invitation to push boundaries, to integrate science with intuition, to achieve harmony not just in shooting but in any discipline, where human potential remained artificially constrained by conventional thinking. She had demonstrated not just what was possible, but what became possible when the arbitrary limitations of established thinking were transcended. On the beach where she collected shells, local children began a tradition. Each morning, they would search for perfectly symmetrical specimens, placing their finds in a small pile near where she usually began her walk. Most days, the shells would be gone by evening, replaced by simple illustrations showing the mathematical symmetry found in nature, the Fibonacci sequence in a nautilus, the golden ratio in a perfect shell, the harmony of natural design that transcended human calculation. The lessons continued, not through formal instruction, but through demonstration, observation, and the quiet transmission of wisdom that required no recognition, no record books, no external validation. In a world increasingly focused on measurable achievements, Chen had revealed the immeasurable potential that existed beyond conventional boundaries. Her legacy wasn't a trophy or a record, but a question that inspired continuous exploration. What becomes possible when we achieve harmony with the world around us? The legend of the harmony shooter spread beyond competitive shooting circles into broader athletic communities. Olympic coaches from disciplines as diverse as archery, biathlon, and even figure skating began studying Chen's integrated approach. They recognized that the harmony she achieved between calculation and intuition, between physics and feeling, represented a paradigm shift applicable to any pursuit requiring precise execution under variable conditions. Dr. Alina Kazan, a sports psychologist who specialized in elite performance, published a groundbreaking paper titled "The Harmony Method: Transcending the Artificial Divide Between Science and Intuition." In it, she analyzed footage of Chen's historic shots, identifying subtle indicators of her integrated approach, the micro-adjustments in response to environmental changes too slight for instruments to detect, the rhythmic breathing pattern that synchronized with natural cycles, the complete absorption in the present moment that eliminated performance anxiety. "What we're witnessing," Dr. Kazan wrote, "isn't merely exceptional skill. It's a fundamental recalibration of how humans can interact with their environment. Chen doesn't conquer conditions, she aligns with them. She doesn't impose her will on physics, she harmonizes with it. This represents not just the next level of performance, but potentially a new frontier in human potential." The paper sparked debate across multiple disciplines. Some traditionalists dismissed it as mysticism, dressed in scientific language. Others recognized it as articulating something elite performers had sensed but never formalized, that the highest levels of achievement occur not through dominating natural forces, but through achieving perfect alignment with them. 3 months after the publication, a prestigious university launched the Harmony Institute, dedicated to studying and teaching the integrated approach Chen had demonstrated. The founding donors included equipment manufacturers who had once dismissed extreme distance shooting as impossible, Olympic committees seeking new competitive advantages, and a surprising addition, a shell collectors foundation that contributed anonymously. The Institute's campus featured a unique architectural design, buildings arranged to channel natural wind patterns, lighting systems that mimic the subtle variations of natural sunlight, acoustic engineering that preserved, rather than eliminated, environmental sounds. The physical space itself was designed to heighten awareness of natural conditions, to train students to observe and integrate rather than isolate and control. The curriculum combined rigorous scientific training with disciplines rarely associated with elite sports, meditation practices that enhanced environmental awareness, sensory development exercises that expanded perceptual abilities, philosophical frameworks that dissolved artificial boundaries between self and surroundings. Students learned not just the physics of their disciplines, but how to feel physical principles in action. Not just the mathematics of trajectory, but how to sense mathematical truths in natural movements. The first graduating class included athletes from 23 countries representing 17 different sports. Their achievements upon returning to competition were remarkable, not just improved performance metrics, but a qualitative difference in how they executed their disciplines. Observers noted the distinctive quality in their movements, a fluid responsiveness to conditions, an extraordinary capacity to adapt to unexpected variables, a consistency that transcended environmental challenges. Sports commentators struggled to describe what they were seeing. It's as if they're having a conversation with physics. One bewildered announcer remarked during an archery competition where a graduate maintained perfect accuracy despite unpredictable wind conditions. They don't just compensate for the wind. They become part of it. As the Harmony method gained recognition, questions about its originator intensified. Where was Chen now? Was she aware of the movement she had inspired? Would she ever emerge to formalize her approach? The shell collector had disappeared from the coastal community shortly after her methodology began spreading, leaving no forwarding address, no contact information, no traces beyond the impact of her example. Investigation into her background revealed little. The medallion that had first identified her as an extraordinary shooter belonged to a competition series, so exclusive that records were sealed by international agreements. The only confirmed fact was that the final champion had disappeared immediately after achieving the previous impossible standard to 2,850 meters in variable conditions, a record that had stood unchallenged for 15 years until Chen herself had broken it. The mystery deepened when military archives released heavily redacted files about a classified program called Transcendence Initiative. The documents revealed that various governments had identified individuals with extraordinary perceptual abilities, people who could detect patterns in seemingly random data, anticipate changes in complex systems, achieve unprecedented precision under chaotic conditions. These individuals had been recruited for specialized training, their identities protected at the highest security levels. The program had been discontinued after officials determined that the abilities demonstrated couldn't be systematically taught using conventional methods. The participants had been released from service with substantial compensation and lifetime anonymity protections. The files included performance metrics that aligned precisely with the capabilities Chen had demonstrated, but all identifying information had been removed. Had she been part of this program? Had she discovered her extraordinary approach through classified training? Or had the program identified her because she had already developed these abilities independently? The questions remained unanswered, but the implications were clear. The harmony she demonstrated represented a capacity that conventional systems had recognized, but failed to cultivate. 18 months after Chen's historic shots, an unexpected invitation arrived at the Harmony Institute. A small sustainable community in the mountains of New Zealand was hosting a gathering called Boundaries of Possibility. The event would bring together individuals who had achieved extraordinary results across diverse fields. A composer who could translate mathematical equations into music that induced specific emotional states. A farmer who had developed agricultural methods that worked in harmony with natural ecosystems. A physician who had documented cases of spontaneous healing through mind-body integration. The invitation specified that attendance was limited to those who had demonstrated, not just theorized, the expansion of human potential beyond conventional limitations. No media would be present. No recordings would be permitted. The gathering would focus not on publicizing achievements, but on exchanging insights about the common principles underlying seemingly different breakthroughs. Dr. Kazan, now serving as the Institute's research director, received the invitation. With a handwritten note attached, she will be there. No signature, no explanation, but the implication was clear. This represented an opportunity to meet the originator of the Harmony method in a context aligned with her philosophy of anonymous excellence. The Institute selected 3 representatives to attend. Dr. Kazan, an Olympic archery coach who had successfully adapted Chen's approach to his discipline, and a 19-year-old shooting prodigy who had been one of the junior shooters present. When Chen left her notebook at Clearwater Range, they traveled to New Zealand without announcements or publicity, honoring the gathering's emphasis on substance over recognition. The sustainable community occupied a remote valley surrounded by mountains that created complex, ever-changing wind patterns. Buildings were constructed to work with rather than against natural forces, cooling through strategic airflow rather than air conditioning, heating through solar design rather than furnaces, water systems that utilized gravity and natural filtration. The residents moved through this environment with the same awareness Chen had demonstrated, responding to subtle cues, adjusting to conditions, achieving efficiency through alignment rather than opposition. The gathering itself reflected this philosophy. No formal schedule dictated when sessions would begin or end. Instead, activities flowed according to natural rhythms, discussions occurring when energy was highest, reflective practices when afternoon light created the right atmosphere, collaborative explorations when spontaneous connections emerged. Between participants, the structure wasn't absent, but organic, like a natural ecosystem responding to multiple variables simultaneously. On the 3rd day, as morning mist rose from the valley floor, the Institute representatives hiked to a ridge, overlooking the community. There, they found a woman sitting quietly, observing the interplay of wind and fog, occasionally making notations in a weatherproof notebook identical to the one Chen had left behind. She didn't acknowledge their arrival immediately, completing her observation before turning to meet them. The years had added subtle lines around her eyes, and her once chestnut hair now showed strands of silver, but her presence remained unmistakable. The economy of movement, the quality of attention, the complete comfort with silence. She offered no introduction, no confirmation of her identity. None was needed. "We've been applying your methods," Dr. Kazan began, breaking the silence. "The results are remarkable, but we know we're only beginning to understand the principles involved, we hoped." Chen raised a hand slightly, redirecting the conversation before expectation could be expressed. "Show me what you've seen," she said simply. For the next hour, as the sun burned away the morning mist, the representatives shared not theories but observations, specific moments, when athletes had achieved harmony with their environments, particular patterns that had emerged across different disciplines, unique challenges they had encountered in translating intuitive understanding into teachable principles. Chen listened without interruption, her attention complete. When they finished, she nodded once, acknowledging the value of their observations. Then she posed a single question. Why do you separate the teacher from the student? The question seemed cryptic until she elaborated. Your institute divides those who know from those who learn. But harmony exists when these boundaries dissolve. The environment teaches, the student teaches, the teacher learns. The separation exists only in the mind. She reached into her pack and removed 3 objects, a perfectly symmetrical shell, a small stone worn smooth by water, and a feather with extraordinarily precise markings. She placed them on the ground between herself and the representatives. What do you see? She asked. The representatives offered technical observations, the mathematical proportions of the shell, the hydrodynamic principles evident in the stone's shape, the aerodynamic efficiency of the feather. Chen listened, then posed another question. And what do you feel? The shift was subtle but profound, from analytical observation to integrated experience. As they reconsidered the objects through this lens, they began noticing different qualities. The way the shell's spiral created a sense of inward focus, how the stone's smoothness invited touch, how the feather's lightness suggested the possibility of flight. Harmony begins when knowledge and experience become inseparable, Chen explained. The measurements matter. The calculations matter. But they remain external until felt, until integrated, until they become not something you know, but something you are. For the remainder of the gathering, Chen didn't lecture or demonstrate. Instead, she created context for integrated learning, guiding the representatives to observe natural phenomena, to feel physical principles in action, to experience rather. Then analyze the harmony she had demonstrated at 3,000 meters. Each exercise dissolved another artificial boundary between observer and observed, between calculation and intuition, between achievement and process. On the final evening, as participants gathered around a central fire, Chen spoke to the entire assembly. Her words were few but resonant. The greatest limitation is believing in limitation. The greatest achievement is forgetting achievement. The greatest teaching is becoming the lesson itself. She didn't address the representatives directly again, but as they prepared to leave the following morning, they found 3 identical weatherproof notebooks outside their rooms. Inside each was not a set of instructions or formulas, but a series of questions, inquiries that would guide exploration rather than define conclusions, that would stimulate discovery rather than transmit fixed knowledge. The final page contained a simple drawing, concentric circles representing the ripples created when a single drop falls into still water. Below it, a single line, your understanding creates ripples. How far will they travel? The representatives returned to the institute transformed. They had sought techniques but discovered principles, expected instruction but received illumination. The changes they implemented weren't administrative but fundamental, dissolving the distinction between faculty and students, integrating disciplines previously considered separate, creating learning environments that mimic the complex conditions of actual performance rather than simplified versions designed for sequential skill development. Most significantly, they shifted from teaching specific methods to cultivating the awareness that allowed practitioners to discover their own harmony. The approach couldn't be standardized because each individual's integration would manifest uniquely, couldn't be reduced to steps because the process was inherently fluid, responsive to infinitely variable conditions. The results confirmed Chen's guidance. As artificial boundaries dissolved, achievements previously considered exceptional became increasingly common. Athletes developed not just technical proficiency, but environmental fluency, the ability to read and respond to conditions. With the same integrated awareness Chen had demonstrated, their performances acquired a quality that transcended mechanical excellence, displaying an almost artistic harmony between individual and environment. The shooting prodigy who had attended the gathering embodied this transformation most visibly. Aiden Mills had been technically gifted but inconsistent, his performance fluctuating with changing conditions. After returning from New Zealand, he stopped focusing on technical refinements and began developing his environmental awareness, spending hours simply observing wind patterns, feeling atmospheric changes, sensing rather than calculating the variables that affected performance. 6 months later, he attempted what no one since Chen had accomplished, a 3,000-meter shot sequence in variable conditions. His approach looked nothing like conventional training. He arrived at the range 3 hours before his scheduled attempt, not to practice but to immerse himself in the environment, walking the full length of the field, noting how wind moved differently across various sections, observing how light affected perception at different distances, feeling rather than measuring the atmospheric conditions. When the time came for his attempt, he established a rhythm that observers recognized immediately, the same integrated flow Chen had demonstrated. His first shot struck center target, as did his second and his third. Between his fourth and fifth attempts, a sudden weather front created conditions even more challenging than those Chen had faced. Aiden didn't fight the change but realigned, adjusting not just his calculations, but his entire relationship to the new conditions. His final shot struck center target, matching Chen's perfect record. When journalists swarmed him for explanation, he provided an answer that reflected his transformation. "I didn't make those shots. We made them together, the wind, the Earth's rotation, the light, the rifle, and myself. I just removed the boundaries between us." News of his achievement spread quickly, but the most significant response came in an unexpected form. The Jew? Day after his record-tying performance, a package arrived at the Harmony Institute addressed to Aiden. Inside was a weathered leather rifle case containing a custom rifle, Chen's rifle, the one she had used for her historic shots. Accompanying it was a note in her distinctive handwriting: "The journey continues when the student becomes the path. The circle completes when the end becomes the beginning. Your harmony now teaches mine." The gift represented more than recognition. It signified the transfer of responsibility from one who had revealed new possibilities to one who would extend them further, from the originator of an approach to its evolution through new understanding. Chen wasn't passing the torch but completing a cycle, ensuring that the harmony she had demonstrated would continue developing through fresh perspective and renewed discovery. Aiden understood the responsibility the gift represented. Rather than capitalizing on his achievement through sponsorships or competitions, he established a traveling academy that brought the harmony method to communities with limited resources. He focused particularly on regions facing environmental challenges, teaching not just marksmanship but the broader principles of harmony that could be applied to agriculture, water management, sustainable development. The rifle that had made history at 3,000 meters now served a different purpose, as a tangible reminder that technical excellence reaches its highest expression when aligned with deeper purpose, that the most important target isn't on a range, but in the expansion of human potential, that true achievement isn't measured in records, but in transformation. 3 years after her appearance at Clearwater Range, Chen's direct influence had multiplied exponentially through those she had touched. The Harmony Institute had expanded into multiple disciplines. The principles she demonstrated had been adapted to fields ranging from medicine to music, and the artificial boundaries she had dissolved remained permanently expanded. Yet Chen herself remained elusive, glimpsed occasionally in remote locations around the world, teaching children in a mountain village to predict weather patterns through natural observation, showing farmers in arid regions how to sense subtle changes in soil conditions, guiding artists to translate mathematical principles into creative expression that resonated on multiple levels simultaneously. She never claimed credit for the movement she had initiated, never sought recognition for the boundaries she had expanded. When asked about her extraordinary achievements, She consistently redirected attention to the principles rather than the person, to the harmony rather than the individual who had demonstrated it. Her legacy wasn't a methodology or a record, but a fundamental question that continued inspiring exploration. What becomes possible when we dissolve the boundaries between knowledge and experience, between calculation and intuition, between self and surroundings? The answer continued to unfold through each person who discovered their own harmony, who integrated their unique gifts with the infinite variables of their environment, who expanded what humanity believed possible, not through domination, but through alignment. The ripples from her demonstration at 3,000 meters continued spreading, touching lives far beyond the competitive shooting community, transforming understanding across disciplines previously considered unrelated. In this way, her influence achieved a quality she had demonstrated in her shooting, a precision that transcended distance, an impact that expanded with time rather than diminishing, a harmony that continued resonating long after the initial moment had passed. The impossible shot had revealed not just extraordinary skill, but a different way of being in the world, aligned rather than opposed, integrated rather than isolated, harmonious rather than controlling. And somewhere, on a distant beach or remote mountaintop, a slender woman with weathered hands and clear eyes continued her own journey, collecting perfectly symmetrical shells, observing the mathematical precision of nature, teaching through example rather than instruction, expanding possibility through harmony rather than force. Her name might be forgotten, her records eventually broken, but the boundaries she had dissolved would never close again. 7 years after Chen's historic shots, the world faced an unprecedented crisis. Climate patterns had shifted dramatically, creating weather extremes that threatened agriculture, infrastructure, and human safety. Conventional prediction models failed to capture the complexity of these new patterns, leaving communities vulnerable to sudden storms, flash floods, and devastating droughts. Traditional approaches, building higher walls, stronger dams, more resilient structures, proved insufficient against forces that changed faster than engineering could adapt. In this climate of uncertainty, a new initiative emerged from an unexpected source. The Harmony Response Network began appearing in regions most affected by unpredictable weather events. Unlike conventional disaster response organizations that arrived after catastrophes, this network focused on prevention through prediction, teaching communities to recognize subtle environmental indicators that preceded major events, developing local expertise in reading natural patterns, creating response systems that adapted to conditions rather than imposing predetermined protocols. The network had no headquarters, no formal leadership structure, no public funding appeals. It operated through a decentralized model that emphasized local knowledge integrated with scientific understanding. Teams would appear in vulnerable regions, work quietly with community members to develop environmental awareness, then move on once local capacity had been established. Their approach wasn't to create dependency, but to awaken capabilities that allowed communities to maintain their own harmony with changing conditions. Analysts tracing the network's methodology recognized a familiar pattern, the same integrated approach Chen had demonstrated at Clearwater Range, applied not to marksmanship, but to environmental interaction. The same dissolution of boundaries between calculation and intuition, between expert and community, between problem and solution. The same emphasis on harmony rather than control, on alignment rather than opposition. Speculation about Chen's involvement intensified when satellite imagery captured a distinctive figure working with coastal villages in the Philippines just before they successfully evacuated ahead of a tsunami that conventional warning systems detected too late. Similar reports emerged from agricultural communities in East Africa that avoided crop failures by adapting planting patterns based on subtle climate indicators conventional meteorology had missed. The most compelling evidence appeared in the network's training materials, weatherproof notebooks containing Not just technical information, but the same type of integrative questions Chen had provided to the Harmony Institute representatives. The final page of each notebook featured the same concentric circles representing rippling water, now accompanied by text in multiple languages. Harmony doesn't resist change, it flows with it. The wave becomes dangerous only when we stand against it, rather than moving with it. Dr. Kazan, now directing global research into applications of the Harmony method, confirmed the connection after reviewing the materials. "This is unmistakably Chen's approach," she stated in a confidential report. "She's taken the same principles. She demonstrated at extreme distances and applied them to humanity's most extreme challenge, adapting to a planet in flux. The precision she achieved with a rifle has evolved into precision prediction of complex natural systems." As the network's effectiveness gained recognition, international agencies began incorporating its methodology into official response protocols. The results were transformative. Regions that had suffered repeated devastation began demonstrating remarkable resilience. Communities previously dependent on external aid developed self-sufficiency through enhanced environmental awareness. The relationship between humans and unpredictable natural forces shifted from antagonistic to adaptive. The impact extended beyond immediate safety. Agricultural practices evolved to work with rather than against changing conditions, resulting in sustainable yields where conventional methods had failed. Water management systems began mimicking natural flow patterns rather than controlling them, creating more resilient distribution networks. Building designs incorporated flexibility rather than just strength, allowing structures to respond to environmental stresses rather than merely resist them. 5 years into the network's operation, the United Nations convened a special conference on harmonic resilience to formalize what had begun as a grassroots movement. Representatives from affected regions shared their experiences, describing how the integrated approach had transformed not just their safety, but their entire relationship with their environment. Technical experts presented data confirming the network's effectiveness compared to conventional methods. Policymakers proposed frameworks for expanding the approach globally. On the conference's final day, an unscheduled speaker was added to the agenda. No name appeared in the program, no biographical information was provided, but as a slender woman with silver-streaked hair and weathered hands took the stage, a ripple of recognition moved through those familiar with the legend of the Harmony. Shooter Chen stood silently at the podium for a moment, her presence commanding attention without demanding it. When she spoke, her voice carried the same quality as her movements, economical, precise, completely aligned with her purpose. "Harmony isn't a technique," she began. "It's a relationship. Not something we do, but something we become. The crisis we face isn't environmental, it's perceptual. We have forgotten how to see ourselves as part of, rather than separate from the patterns that sustain us." For the next 17 minutes, she shared not theories, but observations drawn from communities that had successfully adapted to extreme conditions. She highlighted not exceptional cases, but repeated patterns, how enhanced perception led to earlier response, how integrated knowledge created more effective solutions, how dissolved boundaries resulted in greater resilience. The shell collector understands what the scientist often forgets. She continued, making her first public reference to her life beyond shooting. Patterns reveal themselves to those willing to observe without separation. Mathematics exists not just in equations, but in the symmetry of natural design. Harmony emerges when we align our actions with patterns larger than ourselves. She concluded with a challenge that redefined the concept of expertise: the fisherman who reads the sea by the behavior of birds, the farmer who senses rain by the movement of insects, the child who notices patterns adults have learned to ignore. These are not alternatives to science, but its completion. Our instruments measure what we have learned to isolate. Our senses, properly attuned, integrate what we have artificially separated. As she left the podium, Delegates rose in standing recognition, not just of her as an individual, but of the paradigm shift she represented. The formal proceedings continued, but the nature of the conversation had fundamentally changed. Technical discussions now incorporated intuitive understanding. Policy proposals now included methods for developing perceptual capabilities alongside technological solutions. Implementation frameworks now emphasized community wisdom alongside expert knowledge. The conference concluded with a unanimous resolution establishing the Global Harmony Initiative, a coordinated effort to implement Chen's approach across all systems vulnerable to environmental volatility. The resolution included specific provisions for developing integrated awareness in educational systems, incorporating harmonic principles into infrastructure design, and creating assessment metrics that valued resilience through alignment rather than just resistance through strength. Chen didn't attend the closing ceremony. As formal recognition of her approach reached its peak, she had already departed, continuing her pattern of catalyzing transformation without seeking credit for it. But her influence remained embedded in the initiative's founding principles, which emphasized that harmony wasn't achieved through centralized control, but through distributed awareness, wasn't maintained through rigid protocols, but through responsive adaptation, wasn't measured by absence of disruption, but by capacity for integration. The initiative's first major test came 3 years later when unprecedented storm systems threatened coastal regions on 3 continents simultaneously. Conventional response capabilities were overwhelmed, but communities trained in harmonic principles demonstrated extraordinary resilience. Evacuation decisions were made based on integrated awareness of subtle indicators hours before official warnings. Resource distribution adjusted fluidly to changing conditions rather than following predetermined allocations. Recovery efforts aligned with natural restoration patterns rather than imposing artificial timelines. The contrast between regions that had implemented Chen's approach and those that hadn't provided compelling evidence of its effectiveness. Communities that maintained harmony with changing conditions experienced significantly lower casualty rates, faster recovery times, and more sustainable adaptation than those relying solely on conventional protections. The pattern was consistent. Across different cultures, economic conditions, and infrastructure levels, the determining factor wasn't resources but relationship, wasn't technology but perception. As these results accumulated, Chen's influence extended far beyond the specific context where she had demonstrated her approach. Educational systems began incorporating environmental fluency alongside traditional literacy and numeracy. Medical practices began integrating patients' intuitive body awareness with diagnostic technology. Economic models began valuing harmonic sustainability over extracted efficiency. The principles she had embodied at 3,000 meters were being applied at the scale of global systems. Yet Chen herself remained elusive, glimpsed occasionally, but never captured by the recognition that pursued her. Reports placed her in remote regions facing the most extreme conditions, Arctic communities adapting to rapidly changing ice patterns, island nations developing new relationships with rising seas, desert regions transforming their approach to increasing aridity. She continued teaching through demonstration rather than declaration, through presence rather than pronouncement. The most reliable indicator of her movements wasn't official reports, but transformed communities that displayed her distinctive approach, the integration of calculation with intuition, the dissolution of boundaries between expert and local, the emphasis on harmony rather than control. Like ripples expanding from a single point of contact, her influence spread through the direct transmission of awareness rather than the indirect distribution of information. 10 years after her historic shots at Clearwater Range, a special commemorative event was organized to honor the transformation she had initiated. The event would feature not just presentations about her methodology but demonstrations of its application across diverse fields, Extreme sports athletes who had achieved new standards through environmental harmony, medical practitioners who had improved outcomes through integrated awareness, community leaders who had enhanced resilience through perceptual development. Invitations were sent to everyone associated with the evolution of the harmony method, including Chen herself, though few expected her to attend an event celebrating her influence. The gathering was designed not to culminate in her appearance, but to demonstrate how her approach had transcended her personal involvement, how the ripples had become waves, how the seeds had become forests. The event began with a striking symbol, a 3,000-meter shot attempted not by a single marksman, but by a coordinated team representing the integrated approach Chen had pioneered. A meteorologist tracking atmospheric conditions, a physicist calculating ballistic variables, a local guide sensing subtle wind patterns, and Aiden Mills, Chen's spiritual successor, integrating these inputs through his developed awareness. Their successful first-round hit on center target demonstrated not just technical excellence, but the power of dissolved boundaries between specialized knowledge and intuitive understanding. As the three-day gathering progressed, each session revealed another dimension of Chen's legacy. Medical researchers presented case studies showing how patients trained in body awareness achieved better outcomes than control groups. Agricultural experts demonstrated how farmers integrating scientific knowledge with generational wisdom outperformed industrial methods in challenging conditions. Architectural innovators displayed designs that achieved harmony with environmental forces rather than simply resisting them. On the final evening, as participants gathered for a closing ceremony, celebrating the expansive impact of Chen's approach, an unexpected message arrived. Coordinates for a remote location were delivered to event organizers with a simple instruction: those who wish to continue the journey may gather at dawn. No signature accompanied the message, but none was needed. The invitation's economy of expression identified its source as clearly as a fingerprint. As sunrise illuminated a high desert plateau 60 miles from the event venue, 300 people assembled, researchers who had formalized Chen's approach, practitioners who had applied it in diverse fields, communities who had been transformed by it. They formed a circle around a simple arrangement of stones marking the cardinal directions, waiting in silence as the first light revealed the surrounding landscape in gradually increasing detail. From the eastern edge of the plateau, a figure approached, the distinctive economy of movement immediately recognizable despite the distance. Chen walked to the center of the circle, carrying not her rifle but a weathered wooden box. She acknowledged the gathering with a slight nod, then opened the box to reveal hundreds of small objects, shells, stones, seeds, feathers, each representing a perfect natural pattern. "Choose one," she instructed, "then find its echo in the landscape." For the next hour, participants dispersed across the plateau, each carrying a single item from the collection. They searched not randomly but with developed awareness, looking for the pattern their object represented reflected in the natural environment. The spiral of a shell echoed in a wind-carved rock formation, the symmetry of a feather mirrored in the branching pattern of a desert plant, the proportions of a seed repeated in the relationship between plateau and mountain. As they returned to the circle, Chen invited each person to place their object on the ground, creating a map of interconnected patterns. What emerged wasn't random, but a coherent whole, a visual representation of the harmony that existed when artificial boundaries dissolved, when relationship replaced separation, when perception expanded beyond isolated observation to integrated awareness. "This is my final lesson," Chen said when the map was complete. "What you see before you exists everywhere, at every scale, in every moment. The patterns connect not because we arrange them, but because they are already arranged. Our task is not to create harmony, but to perceive the harmony that already exists, not to impose order, but to align with the order that sustains us." She paused, looking at each face in the circle before continuing. I demonstrated what was possible at 3,000 meters, not to set a record, but to expand the boundary. You have taken that expansion further than I could have traveled alone. Now I ask you to dissolve another boundary, between teacher and student, between leader and follower, between originator and continuation. From her pocket, she removed a single perfect shell and placed it at the center of the pattern. The circle completes itself. The ripple returns to its source. The teaching continues not through me, but through each of you, not as repetition, but as evolution, not as doctrine, but as discovery. With these words, she walked to the edge of the circle and beyond, continuing toward the horizon without looking back. Those gathered understood this wasn't an ending, but a transition, from guidance to self-direction, from external teaching to internal realization, from following a path to becoming the path itself. In the years that followed, Chen was never again positively identified. Reports occasionally surfaced. A woman teaching Himalayan villagers to predict avalanches through subtle snow patterns. A slender figure helping Amazon communities develop resilience to changing river conditions. An aging shooter demonstrating perfect accuracy in impossible conditions, then disappearing before questions could be asked. But these remained unconfirmed, more legend than documentation. Her physical presence had become unnecessary as her approach took root in systems, institutions, and communities worldwide. The harmony method evolved beyond its origins in marksmanship, beyond even its applications in environmental resilience, to become a fundamental reassessment of how humans could relate to complexity, not through increased control, but through enhanced perception, not through rigid protocols, but through fluid adaptation, not through separation, but through integration. 20 years after her first appearance at Clearwater Range, an international survey of transformative influences on 21st century human development ranked the harmony approach as the most significant paradigm shift in how humans addressed complex challenges. The woman who had initiated this shift through an impossible shot was acknowledged, but not centered, her contribution recognized not as personal achievement, but as awakening capabilities that existed in everyone willing to dissolve artificial boundaries. The shell collector who had demonstrated perfect accuracy at 3,000 meters had revealed something more valuable than marksmanship. She had shown that the limits of human potential were defined not by physics, but by perception, not by external conditions, but by internal divisions, not by what opposed us, but by how we related to opposition itself. Her legacy lived not in records or recognitions, but in transformed relationships, between individuals and their environment, between communities and challenges, between humanity and the patterns that sustained it. The harmony she had demonstrated, in a single disciplined moment, had expanded into a movement that continued evolving long after its catalyst had moved beyond identification. Somewhere, perhaps on a distant beach or remote mountaintop, an aging woman with weathered hands and clear eyes might still be collecting perfectly symmetrical shells, observing mathematical patterns and natural design, teaching through presence rather than prescription. Her name might be forgotten, her achievements attributed to others, her methodology evolved beyond her original demonstration. But the boundaries she had dissolved would never close again, and the harmony she had revealed would continue resonating through every life touched by her expanding ripples. In the end, her greatest teaching hadn't been about shooting or even about harmony itself, but about the nature of transformation, that the most profound changes begin with the simplest realignments, that the most enduring influences work through inspiration rather than instruction, that the most important boundaries to dissolve are those we maintain within ourselves. She had shown that true mastery isn't measured by records, but by ripples, not by personal achievement, but by possibilities awakened in others. And perhaps that was the final lesson of the woman who had picked up shells and dropped a 3,000-meter shot that shut everyone up, that the most powerful statement isn't made through words or even actions, but through becoming so completely aligned with possibility that your very existence expands what others believe possible. In a world that celebrated noise, she had demonstrated the power of clarity. In a culture fascinated by complexity, she had revealed the transformation available through harmony. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.